Hello, and welcome to Alex Toth In Depth. This is Paul Fricke, cartoonist, comics professor, and Toth zealot. This is the program where we discuss Toth's work and influence on comics, character design, and visual storytelling. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube or to the podcast. Check show notes for links. For daily Toth art posts on Instagram, follow at Alex Toth In Depth. And please tell a friend. For this episode, we're doing an anatomy of a page, which is page 2 of Double Edge, which was written by Steve Skeates, published in DC Comics Witching Hour 12 in 1970. Before we get to that in depth, just one quick point of personal privilege. I hope that you can check out my new comic with Tim Avers called Blood Orange. You can find this at newdaynoir.com. It's a comic that is long form, and it's about fashion, crime, and celebrity. So please do check it out or follow on Instagram there at Blood Orange Comic, and we release a new chapter every couple weeks. So there's a good chunk of pages and chapters to read there now, and we'd love to hear from you, and please spread the word. So for this Double Edge page, I recently, through on the Alex Toth In Depth Instagram, issued a storytelling challenge and made available the script for this page, sight unseen, for people to do layouts or pencils on, and heard from dozens of people and provided feedback on the work people did. This is stemming from a storytelling assignment I give to my Intro to Comics students at MCAD, Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And I found it's a good page for people to hit the main storytelling points, and then to compare what they do with Toth's page and a lot of people who participated. And certainly my students over the years have found that to be a good challenge and insightful. But I wanted to go a little deeper and dive into this page because it's one of my favorites in all that Toth ever did, and also contains my favorite Toth panel ever, probably. So let's dig in. First, page layout. This is a traditional 6-panel grid, so reading panel to panel, there's no way we're going to get lost. It's very simple and easy to follow. And the storytelling is fairly traditional. Long shots, medium shots, close-ups, etc. But there are some unorthodox compositions, and I believe that Toth used these either by instinct or for particular purposes, which we'll go over in detail. Panel by panel, first there is an interior establishment shot, where we see a kid reading on his bed. Panel 2, threat, a from below panel of a stepmother entering the room. Panel 3 is an extreme close-up of the stepmother grabbing the kid's ear and telling him to get out of his room. Panel 4, the character is proxy for the reader, and I'll go into some more details about that. 5 is a close-up on the object and then the reaction to what's being said and of the object and the actions. And then lastly, in panel 6 is a long shot, which focuses on the exterior of the home and then the actions of the characters. And that pretty much covers it. For page flow, you can see that it's fairly traditional in this regard too. And again, whether by instinct or purposefully, Toth makes the reader's eye go with these 7s and Z patterns. You go across reading the text, down and over to take in the information, and then usually Toth is trying to lead the eye through to the next panel or to the next tier. And again, I don't know how cognizant or aware of this he was, or if he thought about it in great detail, but certainly by instinct he's doing it, and you can see in panel 4 it's really strong in that regard. Our eye is drawn across the text, and then a strong diagonal leads us to the next tier. So usually he's guiding us through to the next panel, to the next page. Black spotting, this is something for which Toth is very well known, and he's using it in a variety of ways on this page. For lighting and to create shadows, You can see little bits of that. We don't see the light coming from the lamp in the lampshade, so we would gather that the light is coming from either overhead or more likely from the window. You can see that the light's coming from below because when we go to panel 2, there's a shadow from the door above it. And that gives it a bit of drama. He's also, dealing with silhouettes, and we can see silhouettes or partial silhouettes, especially in panels 4 and 6. And a silhouette is a very strong graphic statement, the strongest. And he employs it at least in one case here and in part in another. But something I'd really like to point out is black into black bleed. Let's say we're looking at a picture, a photograph, sometimes with poor lighting. A lot of times we will see a black figure or a shadow or black clothing kind of bleed into a darker background, and our eye takes it in that way, in real life and in those photos. Usually when we're sitting down to depict or draw those things, we are separating those things out. So even if it appears to our eye that those things kind of bleed into each other, we work really hard to separate them out to make sure that the figures and the objects and the depth between objects and figures is clear, and that you can read things properly. And Toth, a lot of times, will bleed one thing into another and kind of create, even while he's doing things graphically, he's trying to create a similar look, a verisimilitude of what we would actually see, what our eye would see. And then he finds different ways to separate those out. In panel 2, we see a shoulder of the stepmother bleed into the background. So the black just kind of goes. But there's enough there in the pattern from the shoulder to distinguish and separate the shoulder from the background. In panel 4, you'll see the silhouette or the shadowed figure bleed into the foreground hallway or door jamb. And there's plenty in the last panel, too, where things just kind of bleed into each other. Shadow kind of overtakes it, and then you do see little hints of light and white that separate things out a little bit. In panel 3, though, you'll see that there is shadow on the kid's hair, and then the background is black as well, and he doesn't really give us a little line or rim lighting or anything to separate that out. He lets it bleed over. When you do that, it looks more like real life, or how our eye would take it in, that information, and he's removing that, so he finds different ways to make sure. Now, it's really tough. Things can go very bad quickly and be unreadable if you push that too far or don't find the right graphic approaches to make sure those separate out. But I would encourage you to study Toth's work in that regard and then apply that where and when you can. It also simplifies things so things can read better. I just think that when we're drawing and trying to recreate figures and make sure it's clear to the reader, that we do all kinds of things to separate those things out that don't really appear that way to the eye or in real life. Let's go now panel by panel. In panel 1, we have a few things that are focused on. The character, the environment, and depth. So for the character, we see the figure who's reading, and he's on a bed. He's comfortable. He's got his legs crossed. That tells us a lot about the character. The environment he's in is lived in. There's plenty of things on the wall. There's bric-a-brac. There's holes in the wall. There's a suitcase on a tall shelf. The lampshade, look at that. It's askew. It's knocked a little bit on an angle, which again creates some dynamism and makes things interesting to look at in the picture. That indicates that it's been moved or bumped or whatever else, and things just look lived in. It tells us a lot about this kid, what he's surrounded on. And then look at the bed too. The kid is on the bed, and then not only do we not see only verticals and horizontals and diagonals, but we see this curve of the bed, so we can really feel the weight of the kid on the bed. And it also tells us whether that bed is, really sound in terms of structure or has been used a lot over the years or whatever else. And then lastly, in terms of depth, we see foreground, middle ground, background. There's books in the foreground that kind of frame and make that picture with some deep space. The kid is in the middle ground, and then all the other stuff is in the background. So a lot of things with overlapping of objects and shapes and figures to create that sense of depth as we look through the room. And again, in the background, we see the door with a jacket hung on it, and you'll see as we go panel to panel, that's important. In panel 2, then, we see the stepmother come through that door. So it's been established in the first panel, and so we know, the reader knows that, which door and how that the stepmother is positioned in relation to the kid as they enter the room. The point of view is from below, and again, that's a dramatic effect, but it also is the point of view of the kid on the bed. So, we see the kid on the bed in panel 1, and then we are the kid in panel 2 as we look up. We see what that character sees. Now, you see the composition of that panel is a very strong diagonal, I should say, angle or triangle. And then the sweep or the curve of the stepmom around the chest area also gives us some perspective. And seeing, the door jamb, the wall, and the door behind it in proper perspective creates all of that. It's very sound. We know, we believe that this character is in that space. And then lastly, the character, you'll notice on the cheek, has a birthmark. That's integral to the whole story, and Toth makes very sure that we see that birthmark on the character's face, and that's key to storytelling. He could choose all kinds of things here, but he makes sure that we see a close-up or a medium close-up of that stepmother with the birthmark, because it's key to storytelling later in the story. Go off and read that, find it online or wherever, or dig out the comic, and you'll see that it's very important, and that's key to Toth's approach in this regard. Panel 3. Again, lots of dynamic angles and that triangle shape. It's a power composition. And Toth in this panel focuses on the main action. It is not a reaction. Very often in a panel like this, however it's delineated in the script, we would see, and I think most people would want to show, the reaction of the kid, meaning we'd want to see more of the stepmom being mean. We'd want to see more of the kids screaming so we would feel their pain or their reaction to it. And instead, Toth gives us the point of view of from behind. And why does he do that? He's focusing instead on an intense close-up on the main action and on the fingers on the ear pinching. When that's done, and he's done in such a way, this is a very intense shot, and it's cropped very close. He's packed tons of information in this panel, where we see, the tilt of the kid's head, the arm coming up from the lower left into the panel pointing to the ear. We see the collar of the kid, the hat. We see the hands cropped, right? They're kind of obscured. But we see the hands of the kid, and then even the other arm of the stepmother pointing the kid out the door. And again, we see the door jamb in the door, and where the kid's supposed to go, where she's sending him. That's a lot of information to get across, and he still makes it work, and it's not a confused, busy panel. But the main thing here is that he is focusing everything, pretty much everything in this panel, is pointing us to that ear, and you can see it especially on the stepmother's arm. It's pointing us right to the center of interest, which in this case just happens to be smack dab in the center of the panel. But by doing all those things and cropping as tightly as he is, we're not looking at and observing the kid's pain. We are feeling it. When I look at this panel, I can feel the pinch of that ear on there. To me, that's a more powerful thing. It is not a removed cold, buffered experience because we can't see the kid crying or wailing or whatever else and see his face. Instead, I am in that kid's position and I feel it more than I would if I were just observing it or watching it. At least that's my take on it. Panel 4. Again, lots of dynamic angles. He's got verticals, strong verticals throughout here with the door jamb and the door, but then the angles and diagonals within both of the figures. This is an interior shot, and by that we mean we're seeing through an opening, either a window or a door, to something else in the room and beyond. And it's kind of creates a voyeuristic effect. In general, we are, again, this kid. Even though we're seeing the kid, and he's mostly in shadow, and we are observing in a fashion what he would see looking through the door in the stepmother. She is obscured. She's turned from us. And he's reacting to it like, what? What's going on? What is she talking about now? Very, I don't know, this is probably my least favorite panel in the whole thing in regards to storytelling, but I still think it's effective, and it's a really great panel. A lot of it is because of the composition, and then he's overlapping for depth. There is the figure in the foreground, which bleeds into it. We see the kid in the foreground with the door jamb. That's the foreground. We see the door itself is the middle ground, and then the stepmother is the background. So there's a lot of depth. But when we look at this, there is a flattening effect that's going on even while he's doing that. So while he's separating out different planes, and we see foreground, middle ground, and background, he's also flattening things graphically, and it works both ways. We see it as black and white of the strong shapes, the strong black spotting, but then we also see the depth in it. It's really tough to pull this off, and he does both on this panel. In panel 5, it's an extreme close-up on the object. There's a talisman that's pivotal to the story, and we see that in intense cropping of the foreground. So we know that's a really important thing in the story. Now, if we saw the whole kid's face in this, the kid would kind of become the focal point. And instead, even though he's important, and it is a part where we, of the page where we do see the kid's face and a reaction, he's cropped. And because he's cropped, we are focusing more on the talisman in the foreground than anything else. Again, because of that foreground-background thing, there's incredible depth because of that intense close-up of the hand and talisman. But we see the background as well, and then the reaction of the kid. Talisman is key to this whole panel, though, and pivotal to the entire story. In panel 6, he decides to establish the exterior of the home and the actions, the kid carrying the pails, and then the stepmother throwing this kid's stuff out. Because of the silhouetting and the foreground in the bottom of the panel, a big shadow on there. We're seeing a lot of depth in this too, foreground, middle ground, background. And the black spotting is all done for focus. We see the bric-a-brac that's being thrown out, and that's high contrast, and we see the kid as he's walking. And we feel the mass of that, of the light on the house, on the objects around the house. And then it creates a tone. It's a darker tone for a darker story. For all the Boris Karloff pictures and posters on the wall, and the kid having fun in the first panel, this does give us a sense anyway that it's going to be a dark story as we go forward. So as an overview, I just wanted to go over a couple things. What does Toth focus on this page? He focuses on character details, objects and actions, blocking and staging, an immersive experience, and creating readers' empathy. There's a bunch of different ways he could have handled these panels and these pages, and I think it's different from how a lot of people would draw this page. The character details, again, give us at least a sense of the kid's lived life, and again, of the stepmother, that, she's mean and imposing, and then she's got that birthmark. The blocking and staging, as I mentioned, the door is established in the first panel, and then we see that door in every interior panel, 1 through 5, throughout the rest of it. We know how the characters are moving through this space, and trust me, that is no accident on Toth's part. He has figured out who's where and where they're moving, and he's moving us in and out of that space as we go, out of it and then back into it a little bit, and so on. Because of Toth's unorthodox compositions and choice of shots, he creates, I think, an immersive experience that's a little different from what other people would do. And again, I think some people looking at Toth's work think it's cold or there's a buffer to it because he's more focused on design, they think, than on the human experience or storytelling. And I think that is a misreading of Toth's work. He does a lot, almost every single story of the traditional storytelling stuff. He does the long shots, he does the medium shots, he does the close-ups. He shows the environment, he shows the characters moving through that environment. He conveys tons of emotion with expression and with body language. But, I think in a lot of cases you would see a character's face and know what we're watching and how to read it. Now, if comics are an interactive and immersive experience, then I think Toth is employing that in ways different from how a lot of Western comics artists do. He is inviting us into the world, actions and characters from the points of view of those characters, and then he's choosing, again in panel 3, a kind of shot that just nobody else would do. And we have a different kind of emotional experience, and we have more empathy. We are in that kid's shoes more than we would be, I think, in almost any other storyteller's hands. So that shot, what does that mean? How is he doing that? You're just feeling it more than anything else. We're not seeing the face. We're not seeing the reactions. We are right in the thick of the action, and instead of seeing it, we're feeling it, we're experiencing it, we're living it. And to me, that is, a big strength of comics and comic storytelling. There is you can do traditional storytelling where you show, you can do things where you do tell, and you can do words and pictures together. You can have people reading and filling in the gaps between panels. But the choice of shots and how we go about things and how we tell these things can get to a reader in a way that you might not figure otherwise. I'm in this kid's shoes. I am feeling this more than I would in anybody else's hands. And if you're looking for things about storytelling beyond the black spotting of Toth's work, beyond his incredible draftsmanship and drawing ability, the attention to detail in regards to environments or clothing or whatever else, the body language, this kind of shot with the finger on the ear is the kind of thing that Toth does that nobody else does. There are times in his career, earlier on in some of his early 50s work, where he is getting carried away and figuring it out. He's not exactly sure when to crop, and he gets a little bit carried away, and that obscures things. There's later in his career where, in certain stories, like Rolling Stone, he can overdo it and use that unique stamp of his look and approach, and it becomes a little too claustrophobic, and he doesn't pull back as often as he could. But most of the time throughout his work, he is doing a great balance of doing these traditional storytelling techniques that are grounded and sound, and then mixing it with his sensibility, which is completely unique and unorthodox. Study that more in Toth's work and try to apply it in your own stuff. If you don't agree with how he approached it, that's fine, but at least take a look and see if there's anything to it, and how you can mix up your own storytelling as you go forward. Again, one of my favorite panels and one of my favorite Toth stories. Hope you enjoyed. That's all the time we're giving to this episode, which was edited by Max Paulin. This again is Paul Fricke for the Alex Toth In Depth program. Toth said, asking oneself the right questions to seek the right answers. To do it is then transposed into visuals, which best clarify information and story that you must reveal to the reader. Until next time, go with Toth.